We just got a message from an eagle telling us that the next judgments are going to be, whoa, it's you. So if you thought these were bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Jeez, man. Well, let's look at what we have here. When we look at these judgments, what did you know? And I've said this before, but let's think about this some more. Hail, water turned to blood, the rivers poisoned, the sun darkened. What else happened in biblical history that reminds us of this? The plagues of where? Egypt. You remember the plagues of Egypt? The rivers turned to blood. The frogs left the water. The flies bloated on their carrion. The gnats came. The plague on the livestock. The plague on the humans. Okay. The hail, the locusts, the darkness, and then the firstborn died. Okay. Those are your 10 plagues. Every single one of those plagues could be directly connected in one form or fashion to a particular god or goddess of Egypt. These were not random plagues. I don't have time to really go into that great depth, but the fact that you can recognize that these are the plagues of Egypt says something right there. These plagues, they're bigger meaning without, again, getting too granular. What does this mean? 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 Will this happen? Will this happen? Will this happen? First of all, I don't know if this is meant to be literal or not. Maybe it will. Maybe it will. At some future time, perhaps these will all happen in a very literal fashion. Could God do that? Yes. Nothing's stopping him from doing it. Can you imagine what would happen if hail suddenly fell here in North Hollywood? Hail, right now, in the middle of summer. Can you imagine? That would get my attention. What if you turned on your faucet and all of a sudden it was blood? What if tomorrow afternoon the sun came up and then all of a sudden it got dark? Was it not as bright as it was? Well, first of all, I'll be grateful. It's been hot. But then you notice at night, everything's darker. You don't see as many, well, we don't see any stars here, anyway, but we won't miss much. But the point is, what if you start seeing things like that? What would you think? You see, it might get some people's attention. What's going on? This is not normal. That would be the first thing I would say. This is not normal. Something's wrong. Something's going on. Where's this coming from? Is there a natural explanation? Or is this something beyond nature? Is this happening all over the world? Or is it just in our little community? I think that's something else that our evangelical brothers and sisters fail to take into account. They think that what happens to us here in California, let's say, affects the whole world. Not necessarily. Right? Like I said, there are Christian brothers and sisters dying for their faith, literally martyrs for their faith in Syria and Iraq. Is that happening to us? No, not in the same way. Definitely not in the same way. If I were living in Syria, I would think it was the end of the world. But here, I'm not. You see that? So I think that's something else to keep in mind. That if these are meant to be signs from heaven, they would be something that would be on a global scale. Something that would happen to everyone. Not just in a little one-place city, in one time. Because then I'd just say, oh, the water's turned red. Oh, it must be rust in the sewage system or something. You know what I'm saying? Because in Chicago, it's not happening. It's not happening in Mexico City. It's not happening in France. It's not happening in... You see what I'm saying? But if everywhere this were to happen at once, that would be something that would grab your attention. So I'm just saying that if there is any literalism to these plagues that are described, that it's going to be something on a grand scale. Because why? If these are plagues similar to those that happened in Exodus, which is one of the learning objectives, I can explain the imagery of the trumpet judgments as it relates to the book of Exodus. Here's what you want to answer. What was the purpose of the plagues in Egypt? Because if these are mimicking that in some degree, then we got to look where? Back into the plagues of Egypt and see what was God trying to say back then. And what he was saying is that I am the God of Egypt and Israel. I am the God of everyone. And your gods are not gods, because your frogs have left the river. Your river is poisoned by blood. The hail, the sun doesn't shine anymore. The great sun god Ra doesn't work anymore. And so on. Your animals, your livestock are dying. And the ancient Egyptians worshiped their livestock. The bulls, the sheep, the goats, everything. They worshiped scarabs, for heaven's sake. Beetles. You kill beetles. You don't worship. But the Egyptians did. You see what I'm saying? And so the point is that these were signs against the gods of Egypt. It was to teach the Egyptians to say, don't worship these gods. They're not really gods, because I'm the God that's behind that. I can turn the sun on and off at my will. I can poison the river to blood. I can plague you with flies and frogs and gnats and so forth. And your gods can't help you. You see that? I have to believe that in a similar way, what is the bigger meaning, the trans-chronological meaning, the meaning it had in the first century that it has for us today, is that these are direct assaults on the gods of our time. God is the God of heaven and earth, not these things that we worship. Like what? Like the sun, the moon, the stars, the natural things that go on. Our livestock, everything. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. This culture in particular that we live in, and particularly in this area of California, worships the golden calf. In what form? Wealth. We worship money like you don't know what here in this region. Just go over the hill to Hollywood. See the wealth that's over there. And how do we worship it? By all means we do. We have shows like the Kardashians and the lifestyles of the rich and famous. I mean, we're all into everyone's business. You know what I'm saying? No one cares about Mr. and Mrs. Smith down the street, but we're all into the Hollywood stars, right? Wealth, power, fame. If that isn't the golden calf, I don't know what is. This culture idolizes that. We have billboards all around us promoting the worship of the golden calf. If you want to improve your life, what do you need? A new car. Right? Car ad. You need new clothes. You need this perfume. You need this cologne. You need this anything. You just see it all over the place. The plastic surgeon, yes. You got to be young and beautiful forever. That's the golden calf. Notice it's a calf, not a full-grown cow. Right? Youth. And that's particularly in this culture. That's not true in Europe. It's not true in Europe.
Really? Europeans are changing.
They're changing, but for the most part, like in France, there's a certain je ne sais quoi that's to an older man or an older woman versus a young man and a young woman. They got a certain, there's a different appeal that is generated there. It's true. It's the same calf, it's just different. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's just a different approach and a different cultural setting. You understand what I'm saying? The point is, it's still an idol. And God is here showing that these judgments that befall are like the plagues of Egypt. And let me just say this. If you remember the plagues of Egypt, until about plague 3, the Israelites and the Egyptians were both plagued about the same thing. When the river turned to blood, the Israelites that were slaves there went thirsty, as well as the Egyptians. When the frogs came out, their houses were plagued as well. Around plague 3, God said, I'm going to make a distinction between my people and the Egyptians. And he put them in the land of Goshen. And when the plague fell on the livestock, none of the children of Israel's livestock were affected, and the Egyptians died. When the plague of boils hit the Egyptians, none hit the Israelites. God was making a distinction between his people and the Egyptians. When the sun did not shine in Egypt for 3 days, there was light in the land of Goshen. Reread the plagues in Exodus to find out about them. The point I'm making here is this. God was teaching both his people and the Egyptians at the same time with these plagues. He was teaching the Egyptians that their gods are not gods. He was also teaching the children of Israel that I am your God and I will protect you. Look what's happening. Okay? Notice the distinction. It was also to say to the Egyptians, notice the distinction. None of the Egyptians' children would have died on Passover if they followed what Moses said about the blood on the door. God was not interested in killing Egyptians. He was interested in pulling his people out of slavery, out of the bondage of Pharaoh, and to put them in service to our God. It's very interesting also. The Hebrew word for worship is the same word for service. Worship and service are the same Hebrew word. So when you read how the Israelites served the Pharaoh, you could very well translate it worship. In the same way, what God was saying is that you don't worship him, you don't serve the Pharaoh, you serve and worship me. Okay, the word in Hebrew is obed. Obed.
O-B-E-D?
O-B-E-D, yes. The word Obadiah, for example, the prophet Obadiah means servant of God. It could also mean the worshiper of God. The word Obed means service or worship in Hebrew. And so it's very interesting when you read the account of the Israelites in Egypt, when you read it in Hebrew and you see that word Obed and it says that they served the Egyptians, means you could say in a sense they were worshiping them because they were under bondage. They were worshiping the wrong thing. And God was saying, pull that out. You worship and serve me. And he was saying that to the Egyptians as well. And it's very interesting. You remember the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston? You remember in that there's one scene where his Egyptian mother follows them out of Egypt? I bet you, it's not in the text, but I would bet you that there were a few Egyptians that left that day when they left Egypt too. I bet there were a few converts out of all of this nightmare that they went through, losing their child, everything. I bet you there was some that said, I'm not going to, this is noise. I'm following them because they have the true God. There's no direct evidence for it, but I'll bet you there's something in Jewish tradition. If I looked it up, I'll bet you there is. Lorena.
This worship, is this like a service? Is that like an offering? So would the servants like offer some kind of like the way we worship God?
No, it wouldn't properly be used in the same way. It means that they were in service to. And in the same way, when you worship God, you're in service to Him. It's like being, a better word for it when I say serve, it would be like conscripted. Like a soldier in the military is a serviceman. They don't worship anyone in the service, but they are in service to their leaders. In the same way, the children of Israel were in service to the Egyptians, and they couldn't worship God or serve Him. Yes? It was all forced upon them. Yes, they had no choice. Now, I bring this up because I think that this is a very interesting image when we get to chapter 13 and we start talking about the beast and the Antichrist, because I think one of the precursors, one of the images, if you will, in the Old Testament of the Antichrist is Pharaoh. The way that God's people were oppressed into serving the state over God is a similar way how the Antichrist is going to expect obedience when he appears. I would say the difference is people will willingly fall into service to him versus being coerced like they were. But nevertheless, it's the idea that you are pledging your allegiance to the state and not to God. That is the earmark of following the beast. That is being marked with the beast. Okay? I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but this is all, you got to see the connections to all of this in order to have it all make sense. Yes, Mary.
Getting back to the 7 angels and 7 trumpets.
Yes.
Verses 6 through
13.
13, yeah.
Mm-hmm.